When it comes to web design, we tend to spend a lot of time thinking about things like color and spacing and layouts and even interactive elements. But you can't make any of those things look good if you start off with bad typography. In today's video, we're going to tackle 5 different ways you can improve your website's typography by making things more responsive, balanced, easier to read, and accessible. If that sounds interesting to you, then stick around and let's get started. If you're still setting font sizes for all your breakpoints using the settings inside your page builder or by writing out media queries, then I highly suggest you look at clamp functions to save yourself a lot of time and headache. Clamp functions work by setting a minimum and maximum size for your text, and then does all the calculations for you to scale that text up or down based on the device width. This means you can forget about media queries and have the confidence that your text looks great and scales proportionately on any device. The only problem with clamp functions is that people tend to shy away from them because they're not very clear when you first look at them, and it can be kind of intimidating. But the secret is, most people don't write clamp functions on their own. They use calculators that do all this work for you. Personally, I like this calculator on Chris Burnell's website because it's simple to use and uses logical properties for the viewport units. Let's go ahead and try this out together. So let's assume we're going to work on our H1 headings. On our smallest screens, we want those to be the equivalent of about 40 pixels. Now, don't worry, we're not going to actually use pixels here, we're just referencing them. On larger screens, we want these headlines to scale up to be 64 pixels. Next, we'll see our minimum and maximum viewport. Basically, we don't want these font sizes to scale infinitely, so we need to cap them on either end. I'll go with 400 for my minimum, and since my site's content width is set to 1200 pixels, I'll go ahead and use that for the maximum value. You can leave these next 2 items alone as long as you haven't gone in and changed your root font size, which I wouldn't recommend you doing, and then you can hit calculate. Your clamp function is right here under the result, which you can just copy and paste right into your font settings in WordPress. Now your H1s will scale up or down based on the device width, and you only had to give them one value. I'll just usually leave this calculator open, and as long as I don't refresh the page or press this reset button, I don't have to change out the viewport settings, and I can go through and define all of my typography. But you might be wondering how you even come up with these values in the first place, which leads me right into my next tip. The best way to set your typography, at least initially, is to use a type scale. A type scale uses math functions just to make sure that all your font sizes are in proportion to one another and scale up in a nice way. These often use the same naming convention as we hear in music. And just like in music where these math functions create harmonious sounds, these math functions create harmonious visuals inside of our typography. But don't worry, smart people have already figured all this math out for us, and all we have to do is use this visual interface and it will give us everything we need. Let's go ahead and check that out next. Here at typescale.com, you can see we have a bunch of settings on the left-hand side. Then in these 2 windows, we have a preview of the font sizes in their scale and a preview of what that would look like on an actual website. As we change the body size or the scale, we can see these values update in real time. If we use a large scale, one where the steps in between each interval are much bigger, like a perfect fifth, you can see our font sizes scale up pretty dramatically. But if we use a smaller scale, like a major second, the difference between each level is much smaller. Now, tools like this will help do all that math and calculation for you, but you're still going to have to use your own judgment on a subjective decision to decide what kind of scale is appropriate for your website or for your design. Now, generally speaking, we want a larger scale for the desktop versions and a smaller scale for the mobile versions, as we don't have as much screen real estate to deal with. You can pick up the pro version of typescale.com for about $36 a year, and that will give you all the responsive scales and a bunch of other goodies. Now, I haven't used the pro version myself, but it looks pretty neat. If you're willing to have a less polished UI, I actually really like this site instead. Here we can set our base sizes, our screen width, and our type scale ratio for both the mobile and desktop versions. But what I really love about this tool is the ability to define how many different steps in your scale you want. Here in the All Steps box, you can set what different levels of font sizes you want. As a starting point, I'll usually use a body small, my body, and then H6 through H1. But you can add more or less levels of headings based on your design system. Then you set your baseline, as in what's going to be the base font size for your website. In my case, that's the body size. Now, if you scroll to the bottom of the page, you can see your type scale in action and use the slider to see how it looks on desktop all the way down to mobile. Let's go ahead and adjust these settings to match our needs, and then I'll show you how we can put this all into our website. For mobile, I'm going to set the base font size to 16. The screen width is fine, and I'll set the type scale to 1.125 or a major second. For the desktop, we'll go with an 18 pixel body font size. We'll set the screen width to 1200 pixels, and we'll move this up to a 1.2 or minor third type scale. Our type scales are set, and for the purposes of this demo, I won't go through all these other settings, but there are some other real gems here. Scrolling down to look at my preview, I like the look of this a lot, so let's go ahead and grab our clamp values. Like the clamp calculator we used before, this tool also uses logical properties, and it's taken everything we've put into this form and done all the calculations for us. Unfortunately, it's either really difficult or impossible to grab these clamp values one by one, so I'll copy and paste the code, drop it into a text editor, and then grab the values I need. Now this is great for setting up all our HTML elements like our heading sizes, but it often puts us in a position where we start using our HTML elements based off their size instead of their semantics. Now, it doesn't take too much digging to find sites where you can tell they've used heading levels for the desired visual effect, completely ignoring the fact that this put their headlines out of sequential order and made a huge mess in terms of accessibility. To avoid this, I like to create lookalike classes. For example, I could create a lookalike class that has all the same exact values as my H3, but then I could apply it to things like my H2 or even a paragraph and keep the consistent values of my H3 without having to go out of order or use the wrong semantics. Now, doing this inside Generate Blocks and Generate Press, at least for now, is pretty difficult if not impossible. And I'm not sure if there's really any builders that are set up to do things like this. So for me, I like to skip the customizer for all these typography settings and put everything right into my styles.css. Let me show you exactly how that works. Here I have all the values for my H1 heading. You can see I've just targeted my H1 and I've set my font size, my line height, and you can imagine I have everything else in here. To make a lookalike class, I just add a comma after my H1 and then add a new class like looks-H1. This way I can use an H1 element or add the H1 looks-alike class depending on the context, but they will look identical. I'll go through and do this for all my headings and my body copy and put it all into my style.css file. Unfortunately, this is a bit more work, but for me, it's worth it because it gives me more flexibility and helps make my websites more accessible. I've actually considered doing a dedicated video to how I've set up all my typography settings inside my child theme, but it always seemed like it might be a little bit too complex for the types of videos I typically do here on YouTube. Now, if that's something you think you would enjoy seeing, then let me know down in the comments and I'll consider coming up with a video to explain how all that works. I've actually abstracted a little bit further to make it really easy to switch out the typography from site to site. So let me know if that's something you're interested in. Okay, now we've been in the weeds a little bit here, I admit, so let's take a step back and take a look at something that might be a little bit easier to digest and a little less overwhelming, and that's line height. I think the general consensus is that there's an inverse relationship between the size of the font and the amount of line height you need. And in terms of setting up all your defaults inside your typography settings, I would say that's generally true, except I don't think it's entirely true. I think it's important to realize that it's not actually the font size that determines how much line height you need, it's how much text you have. Let me show you what I mean. Our body copy usually needs a line height of 1.5 or more because we're usually writing longer, multi-line paragraphs of text with our body copy. Having lots of line height makes passages of text like this easier to read. But if we use that same line height for just 2 lines of text, like these little leads underneath a headline, the line height looks way too big. To make this look right, we'd probably need to tighten this line height up to something like 1.2 or 1.3. This works in reverse with headlines too. It's not a practical example because you probably won't use headlines for long paragraphs, but you'll see this 1.1 line height looks great with this 2-line headline, but it becomes almost impossible to read once we go to 4 lines or more. I know this is probably really frustrating for the people that want to program in their line height and then just have it work in every instance, but design is more nuanced than that. Now, I too will set a bigger line height for body copy and a smaller one for headlines, but I think it's important to understand that you might have to override this on a case-by-case basis. When it comes to design, it's usually the details that really make a design come together, and thinking about these line height in context with how much text you have can actually make a pretty huge difference. Now, similar to line height, there's also a correlation between how big a font is and how long you can stretch out that line of text and still read it comfortably. It's the reason you see much more narrow containers on popular blog sites like Medium, news sites like the New York Times, or even inside our social feeds. You'll find that a lot more amateur sites are using really wide content width for long-form small text. And while you might not notice right away that it's harder to read, look at these two side by side. If you're unfamiliar, the character unit, or CH, lets us set the width of an element based on how many characters, specifically zeros, fit within that element on a single line. This means we can set a container to something like 65 CH and be confident that our text will never be too wide to comfortably read, even if the visitor changes their font size. Setting a container's width in CH units is great for long-form content because it keeps text lines from becoming too wide and hard to read. However, it doesn't work in every situation. Now, it's important to remember that the CH unit bases its size on the font size of the container itself, not the text inside of it. So if you change the text size inside of the container, it will not adjust automatically. To keep things consistent, set the font size on the same element where you use the CH width. Typography is there to visually represent the information somebody wants to consume on your website, and it makes up a huge percentage of what the user sees on the screen. So it's important to realize that even small tweaks here can make a drastic improvement on the overall look and feel and usability of your website. I would love to know if any of these tips, tricks, or tools were new to you, so leave a comment down below with the one thing that you took away from this video. If you learned something new, I would really appreciate a thumbs up, and if you want to make sure that YouTube knows you want to see my future videos, then hit subscribe and we'll see you next week.